He ran the most feared criminal organization in the Midwest, but on a cold Tuesday in November, he checked into the Parkside Hotel under a fake name, carrying a broken suitcase and exactly $11 in his coat pocket. Cesare Vitelli had not survived 42 years, 12 of them at the top of a criminal empire that stretched from the Chicago waterfront to the Milwaukee rail yards, by being naive. He had survived by never trusting comfort, by never trusting smiles, by learning, early and painfully, that everyone who stood close to power was only standing close to what power could give them. So when his inner circle had been infiltrated, when a man he had known since he was 19 sold his shipping routes to the Muro family for a price Cesare would have paid himself just to keep him loyal, something in Cesare Vitelli went very cold and very quiet, not angry, not impulsive, cold. He needed to remember what people actually were when they thought you had nothing. The Parkside Hotel sat at the corner of Milwaukee Avenue and Evergreen, a 3-story building with a sagging green awning and a lobby that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. It was the kind of hotel that charged $49 a night, where the hallway ice machine had been broken since 2019, and the breakfast buffet closed at 8:45 sharp. It was not the Four Seasons. It was not anywhere Cesare Vitelli had stood in years. He wore a coat from a Goodwill bin, a grey knit cap pulled low. 3-day stubble that was not fashionable on him, just tired-looking. He paid the first 2 nights in cash, told the woman at the front desk his name was Charles Vetter, and limped slightly as he made his way to room 412. Nico, his second-in-command, had tried to argue him out of it. "The Muro family is moving product through the South Side," Nico had said, leaning against the doorframe of Cesare's actual office, a room on the top floor of a building on Dearborn that officially housed a real estate investment firm. "You want to play homeless in a budget hotel while they do it." "I want 3 days," Cesare had replied without looking up from the window. "Park 2 blocks south, and don't interfere unless I call." Nico knew better than to push. Adele Sharpe started her shift at 6 in the morning. She had been starting it at 6 in the morning, 5 days a week for the past 3 years. She was 26 years old, and she was tired in a way that had settled into her bones so gradually she had almost stopped noticing it. She was a big woman, 270 pounds on a good day, spread across a frame that was broad-shouldered and wide-hipped and entirely her own. She had stopped apologizing for it sometime around 23, after her father's diagnosis, after she had sat in a hospital waiting room for 6 straight hours and realized that her size was the least interesting thing about her by a distance of about 10 miles. Her father, Reuben Sharpe, had died 14 months ago. He had left her a 1-bedroom apartment in Logan Square, a box of photographs she could not yet bring herself to open, and $63,000 in outstanding medical debt that the collection agencies had very promptly made her problem. So Adele worked. She pushed her cart down the corridors of the Parkside, knocked on doors, changed sheets, scrubbed toilets, restocked the little bottles of shampoo that smelled like artificial lavender. She was efficient and invisible, which was more or less how the world had always preferred her. She met Charles Vetter on his second morning. He had left a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door, so she had skipped him. But at 11:15, when she came back down the hall with a fresh supply of towels, she found him standing outside room 412, staring at the vending machine at the end of the corridor, with an expression she recognized immediately. She had worn it herself enough times. It was the expression of someone calculating whether they could afford what was in front of them. He had 3 quarters in his palm. The cheapest thing in that machine was a packet of peanut butter crackers. It cost $1.25. "The hot breakfast closes at 8:45, Adele said. She wasn't sure why she said it. "But I kept a plate back for one of the guests who asked me to, and they just called down to say they didn't want it. It'll go in the trash otherwise. He looked at her. His eyes were dark, a deep, serious brown that didn't match the rest of his exhausted appearance. They were the eyes of someone paying very close attention, even when they looked like they were doing nothing of the kind. "I'm fine," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm just saying it's going to waste." He stared at her for another moment. Then he nodded, almost imperceptibly, and she went to get the plate. She brought it back on a tray she was not technically supposed to use for this purpose. Scrambled eggs, 2 slices of wheat toast, a cup of coffee she had filled from the breakfast service carafe before it was put away. He took it without ceremony, without the excessive gratitude that would have embarrassed them both, and said, "Thank you." "Room warm enough?" she asked. "The thermostat on this floor runs cold." "It's fine. I can bring an extra blanket." He looked at her again with those careful eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Adele thought about it honestly. "Because you looked hungry," she said. "And I've been hungry. It's not a great feeling." She brought the blanket. She did not ask anything else. By the 4th day, Charles Vetter had become a puzzle she was not trying to solve exactly, but kept turning over anyway. She had cleaned enough rooms to know what broke looked like. The particular archaeology of poverty, the rinsed-out socks hung over the radiator, the food wrappers, the careful arrangement of the few things a person owned. His room was different. It was nearly empty, intentionally empty, like someone who had chosen to bring nothing rather than someone who had nothing to bring. He moved differently, too. When she knocked and entered to clean, he would shift out of the way with a spatial awareness that was almost military, always knowing where the exits were, always keeping his back to a wall when he sat. His hands, when she glimpsed them, were not the hands of someone living rough. They were clean, calloused, but in a specific way. She didn't say any of this. It wasn't her business. What became her business was when she overheard the front desk manager, a thin, perpetually irritated man named Garrett, tell his assistant that the guest in 412 had bounced his card for the 3rd night, and if he didn't produce payment by noon, they were calling it and having him removed. Adele was standing 6 feet away, folding towels. She thought about the plate of eggs. She thought about the way he had said thank you like he meant it, not like a performance, but like a reflex. She went to the front desk on her break and paid for 2 additional nights on Charles Vetter's room with her own credit card. It cost her $98, which was 1/3 of her grocery budget for the month. She told herself it was a loan. She told herself she would tell him, and he could pay her back. She did not tell him. She just added it to the long, silent ledger of things she did for people who would never know. He found out, of course, because Cesare Vitelli had not survived 12 years at the top of a criminal organization by missing things. He saw the charge on the revised receipt slipped under his door. He saw Adele Sharpe, employee courtesy account, printed next to the payment. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed for a long time. In 3 days he had been turned away from 2 restaurants, ignored by a cab, laughed at by a man outside a corner store, and had a cup of change thrown at his feet by a woman who told him to do something with himself. The world, he had confirmed, was largely what he already suspected it was. But a housekeeper who made, at his rough estimate, $32,000 a year had paid for his hotel room because she didn't want a stranger out in the cold. He pulled out the burner phone. He did not call Nico. He called the front desk and asked to leave a message for the housekeeper named Adele. The message said, "I know. I'll pay you back. Thank you." Under it, because he could not help himself, he added, "Why?" The note she slipped under his door the next morning said, in handwriting that leaned slightly left, "Because you looked like you needed it more than I needed the $98. Don't overthink it, Charles." He stayed 2 more weeks. Not in room 412, which he paid for himself with cash, carefully, like a man who had exactly enough. He was not playing broke anymore, exactly, but he was not ready to stop either. He was addicted to something he didn't have a clean word for, the straightforwardness of it. The way Adele Sharpe talked to him in the hallway on her rounds, sitting on her cart when the floor was empty, and the night went quiet, telling him about her father, about the debt, about the dreams she had folded up and stored somewhere practical until the bills were paid. "I wanted to be a physical therapist," she said one night. She said it like she was reporting a fact about a stranger. "I was 2 semesters into the program when Dad got diagnosed. I withdrew to work full-time. I keep telling myself I'll go back." "Will you?" She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. The debt is a lot. And I'm not 22 anymore." "You're 26. Which sounds like a lot until you're carrying $63,000 and a full-time job, and you realize the math doesn't actually work out the way the motivational posters say it does." Cesare looked at this woman, round-faced and tired and absolutely clear-eyed about her own life, and felt something move in his chest that he was not prepared for. He had been surrounded for 12 years by people who told him what he wanted to hear. Adele Sharpe said exactly what she thought, to a man she believed was nobody, because it was the truth, and the truth didn't cost her anything to tell. He thought with a cold clarity that was different from the coldness he was used to. "I am in serious trouble." The Muro family arrived on a Thursday. Cesare was in the lobby, buying a newspaper from the rack near the entrance, when the black Escalade pulled up outside. He recognized the vehicle before he recognized the people. Plates he had memorized months ago. His blood went still. Francesca Muro stepped out first. She was Rinaldo Muro's girlfriend and his preferred instrument of intimidation. She walked into rooms and assessed them the way a general assessed terrain. She wore a long camel coat and carried a bag that cost more than Adele made in 2 months. Rinaldo followed, broad, grey at the temples, wearing the particular expression of a man who considered his presence a favor to any room he entered. They were here for the 3rd-floor conference room. The Parkside Hotel's one claim to relevance in certain circles was that it was considered neutral ground, precisely because no one powerful enough to matter ever stayed here voluntarily. Cesare pulled his cap down and turned toward the wall of tourist brochures, keeping his back to them, his pulse steady through an act of pure will. He made it to the elevator. He was stepping in when he heard Francesca's voice, sharp and carrying, from the direction of the front desk. "I don't think you understand what I'm asking. I need the conference room at 6, not 6:30. Who do I need to speak to? Who's actually capable of understanding that?" He didn't turn around. But Adele was there. He heard her voice next, calm, professional, cutting through the space with a quiet authority that had no need to raise itself. "I can help you with that. Let me check the room schedule." A pause. Then Francesca's voice, lower but pitched to carry. "Oh my God, they just let anyone work a hotel desk now, don't they?" Ripples of laughter from someone in Rinaldo's orbit. Adele's voice unchanged. "The conference room at 6 is available. I'll need a card for incidentals." "Can you even reach the desk?" Francesca said. She wasn't really asking. The lobby went the specific kind of quiet that meant everyone had heard and no one was going to say anything. Cesare stepped out of the elevator. He walked back toward the desk. He had about 30 seconds before Rinaldo turned around and recognized him, and 0 workable options if that happened. He was unarmed, out of position, in a lobby with no clean exit. He did not think about any of that. He walked toward the desk because Adele Sharpe was standing behind it, absorbing a humiliation that was aimed indirectly at him, and he was done standing still, and he was done standing still. "Is there a problem here?" he said, loudly enough that several guests turned. Francesca looked at him with the instant, categorical dismissal she reserved for people she had decided did not exist. "No one was talking to you." "I'm a guest," Cesare said, and this employee has been nothing but professional, which is more than I can say for whoever raised you." A sharp inhale from somewhere nearby. Francesca's eyes narrowed. She stepped toward him, and that was when Adele moved. She came around the side of the desk quickly, for a woman who had been on her feet for 7 hours, and positioned herself squarely between Francesca Muro and the man in the grey knit cap. Her frame was broad and solid, and she planted herself like she had every right to occupy exactly that much space, which she did. "Ma'am," Adele said, addressing Francesca directly, her voice level as a blade, "if you have a concern about our service, I'm happy to get you our manager's card. But this conversation is over. We don't speak to guests or staff the way you just did. That is not something we allow here." She paused one beat. "Now, card for incidentals, or would you prefer to find another venue?" Rinaldo put a hand on Francesca's arm. He was watching the large, composed housekeeper with an expression Cesare recognized, the expression of someone recalculating. "Let it go," he said, very quietly. Francesca shook him off, but she reached into her bag and produced a card. She dropped it on the desk. 6 o'clock, she said, and walked away. The lobby slowly exhaled. Cesare stood where he was. Adele was already running the card, efficient and professional, not looking at him. When she finally glanced up, her expression said, "Please do not make this a thing." He went back to the elevator without another word, but his hands, inside the pockets of the Goodwill coat, would not quite stop shaking, not from fear, from something else entirely that he was not yet ready to name. They found her 4 days later. Rinaldo Muro had put a tail on the housekeeper who had publicly neutralized Francesca in the lobby of a neutral ground hotel. He didn't understand why a broke nobody in a knit cap had been worth defending, but in his world you didn't defend nobodies, you defended assets. He wanted to know whose asset she was. It was a Wednesday evening, and Adele had stayed late to cover a colleague's shift. She was walking to the bus stop on Milwaukee when the van pulled up. She fought. She was not small, she was not fragile, and she had 6 years of surviving this city on her own, so she fought with everything she had. She scratched. She screamed. She got a hand free and connected hard enough to feel the impact travel up her arm. It wasn't enough. Cesare Vitelli was standing in front of his actual bathroom mirror in his actual penthouse on the Gold Coast, washing real soap off his real hands, when Nico walked in holding a phone with the expression that meant something had gone wrong enough to end careers. "Muro's people grabbed the woman from the Parkside," Nico said, 40 minutes ago. The mirror reflected a man becoming something else. The soft, careful thing that had sat in a budget hotel room for 2 weeks and listened to a woman talk about physical therapy programs and medical debt and the weight of hope set aside, that thing compressed itself into a very small, very cold point and went still. What replaced it was older, harder, and completely without mercy. Cesare dried his hands. "Where?" he said. The warehouse was in the Bridgeport neighborhood, 2 blocks from the river, in a cluster of industrial buildings that changed hands on paper every 18 months and belonged, in practice, to whoever was currently paying the property managers to look the other way. Adele had been put in a chair, her wrists were zip-tied. Her left cheekbone had been struck hard enough that the whole side of her face had gone the hot, distant numb of impending bruise. She was breathing through her nose because her jaw hurt when she opened her mouth. Rinaldo stood in front of her. He had taken off his jacket, which struck her, absurdly, as the most threatening thing in the room. "The man from the hotel," he said. "Who is he?" "A guest," Adele said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Guests don't get protected by housekeepers." This one did. Rinaldo crouched to her eye level. He had the careful, patient expression of someone who did not lose his temper because he had never needed to. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Who is Charles Vetter, and who sent you to watch him?" "Nobody sent me anywhere," Adele said. "I brought him a plate of eggs because he was hungry. That is the entire story." Rinaldo studied her face. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't expect anything from you," she said, "but it happens to be true." Then the far end of the warehouse exploded. Not literally, but the reinforced steel doors separated from their frames with a sound like a thunderclap, and a heavy black vehicle came through the gap with the absolute, unhurried certainty of something that had never once considered the possibility of being stopped. Sparks cascaded across the concrete. The ceiling shuddered. Men poured in from 3 directions, fast and coordinated and very, very quiet. And then Cesare Vitelli walked through the ruined doorway. He was not wearing a knit cap. He was not wearing a Goodwill coat. He wore a charcoal suit that fit the way expensive things fit. Like it had been made for exactly this body and no other, and he crossed the warehouse floor with the particular unhurried authority of a man who had never once entered a room and wondered whether he belonged in it. Adele stared. The dark eyes, fixed on Rinaldo Muro with a quality she could only describe, later to herself, as terminal. "Cesar," Rinaldo breathed. He had gone the color of old concrete. "I was going to let you keep the South Side routes," Cesare said conversationally, stopping 6 feet from him. "I was going to absorb it as a business loss and move forward. I was in a generous mood." A pause. "I am no longer in a generous mood." He did not raise his voice once. He didn't have to. 2 minutes later, Rinaldo Muro was zip-tied to the chair he had been using as a prop, and Cesare was kneeling on the filthy warehouse floor in front of Adele Sharpe, cutting through her restraints with a folding knife from his jacket pocket. "Your face," he said immediately, his voice stripped of everything except what it actually was. "It's fine," she said. Her wrists came free. She brought her arms forward and looked at the marks on them. Then she looked at him. "Who are you?" she said. It was not quite a question. "Cesare Vitelli," he said. He met her eyes and did not look away. Criminal, enterprise, Chicago, Milwaukee, parts of Detroit. He said it the way she told him hard truths. Plainly, without dressing. "I have more money than I will ever spend. I checked into the Parkside Hotel as Charles Vetter because I needed to know how the world treated a man with nothing. I needed to know if anyone was real." The warehouse held its silence around them. "You gave me your meal," he said. "You paid for my room out of your grocery money. You stepped between me and a woman connected to people who could have hurt you, and you did it because it was the right thing and for no other reason." His voice was not quite steady. "You are the first genuinely real thing I have encountered in a very long time, Adele, and I have been lying to you, and I am sorry, and I need you to know both of those things." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Get me out of this warehouse." She did not speak to him for 11 days. He did not crowd her. He paid off her debt, all $63,000 of it, through channels that took exactly 48 hours to process. He did not tell her he was going to. He did it and he waited. On the 12th day, she came to the address Nico had passed along because Adele Sharpe had never once in her life run from a conversation she needed to have. She was wearing a dark green dress and her hair was down, and she walked into the lobby of his building and rode the elevator to the top floor with the expression of someone who had decided exactly what they intended to say. He was waiting in the living room. He had not sat down. She stood in the center of the room and looked at him. Then she said, "You don't get to buy my forgiveness." "I know," he said. "You paid the debt. Fine, but that was guilt, and guilt is not an apology." "You're right." "I spent 3 years being invisible," she said. Her voice was level and it cost her something to keep it that way. "I go into people's rooms and I clean up after them, and they look right through me like I'm furniture, and I told you things. Real things about my dad, about school, about the way my life actually is, because I thought you understood what it was to have nothing." That made you safe. She stopped. You were never that person. No, he said. He did not look away from her. I wasn't. But everything you told me was real, and everything I felt sitting in that hallway listening to you was real. The lie was the coat and the hat, not the rest of it. She was quiet. The debt is paid, she said finally. Thank you, and I want something else. He waited. There are 40 families in my building alone, carrying medical debt they will never climb out of, she said. My father wasn't the only one. The collection agencies are in the hallways, in the mailboxes. People are choosing between insulin and rent and doing it every month. She looked at him steadily. You have money you got by hurting people. I'm not going to pretend I don't know that. But you can use it to help people who look like me, who came from where I came from. A breath. I want you to fund a debt relief program. Real money, structured properly, not a gift with your name on it. Just money that works. Cesare looked at her, at the set of her jaw, at the absolute absence of apology in her posture. Done, he said. She looked slightly thrown by how quickly he said it. I was expecting more negotiation, she admitted. I don't negotiate with people I respect, he said. I'm still angry at you, she said quietly. I know. And I don't know what you think this is. I think, he said carefully, that it is whatever you decide it is. If you decide it's nothing, I understand it. If you decide it's something else, I will spend a considerable amount of time earning it. Adele Sharpe looked at the most powerful and most dangerous man she had ever been within 10 feet of, standing in the middle of a penthouse that cost more than her entire neighborhood, and she thought about a hotel hallway at midnight, and a man who had listened to her like the words actually mattered. She thought about the way he had crossed that warehouse floor. She thought about $98 and a plate of eggs, and a note that said, "Don't overthink it, Charles." One condition, she said. Name it. No more tests, not of me, not of anyone around us. If you want to know something, you ask. You don't construct an experiment and drop people into it without their knowledge. She looked at him without flinching. I am not a variable. No more tests, he said. And if you lie to me again, she said, I walk. No scene, no negotiation, I walk. Understood. She held his gaze for one more long moment. Then slowly she sat down. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was not a sweep-off-her-feet moment or a dramatic kiss or a neat resolution of everything that had been broken. It was Adele Sharpe, sitting down in a room she had every right to walk out of, offering a dangerous man the most valuable thing she owned, a chance, on her terms, in her voice, without apology or performance. Chicago went on below them, indifferent and alive with its own particular noise, the city that had worn them both down in different ways and left them standing anyway. The streets still carried their old business. The Parkside Hotel still charged $49 a night, and somewhere in Logan Square, a cart of clean towels waited at the start of another long shift. But in the top floor of a building on the Gold Coast, a woman who had spent 3 years being invisible sat down and took up exactly as much space as she wanted, and the man who ran the city's underworld pulled up a chair and waited to see what she would say next. Because after 12 years of people telling him what he wanted to hear, the truth, when it finally showed up, turned out to be the most dangerous thing he had ever encountered. He was not afraid of it. For the first time in a very long time, he was not afraid of anything.